Dungeon Meshi has quickly become one of my favorite anime this year, with a convincing setting, easy to follow plot, amazing humor, and just the best characters. You can take almost any moment with these characters and it's something memorable, whether it's Laios cringing out the sirens by singing their own song back at them, Chilchuck's absolute hatred for mimics, or really anything happening with Senshi or Marcille. There isn't a moment of this show that's put to waste. And while I was watching, I really couldn't help but notice how good of a party setup they have, minus the role of like a mid-combat support, which we'll get to. Laios is the general frontline, Marcille is the backline mage, Senshi helps with tanking, and Chilchuck does Chilchuck things. And while we haven't seen a whole lot of her fighting, Izutsumi does have a place in the party, it's just not as well defined yet. And the only thing we're missing, like I said, is a healer, which was the place of Fallon, Laios' sister, and it's also kind of the entire reason they're going down into the dungeon again so early. And again, that got me thinking, how well is this party prepared for taking on a red dragon? How strong are they? At least in terms of like D&D. So today on the Game Master's Guide, that is what we're doing. I'm going to be going through each of the main characters in the Dungeon Meshi party, and seeing where they stand in terms of level and abilities. This is not going to be a level by level breakdown, it's also not going to be as in-depth as my other ones because I have 5 characters to go through here, because I did make everyone except for Fallon. Also, if you like these kind of videos, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment asking me to do other breakdowns. I'm perfectly fine doing more of these if that's what you guys want. Also, go check out our D&D Jeopardy series, which is also right here on this channel, to see how much you know about D&D. And we might have a special episode of that coming sometime soon. Oh, and just in case you haven't seen it, go check out my review of The Colonist by My Wife is the MC over on the main channel. Great stuff. Okay, enough stalling, let's get into these characters. But who do we start with? There's 5 different characters here to pick from, and Laios. We're gonna go with Laios. Not only is Laios probably the simplest, well, almost the simplest, he's also kind of the de facto leader of the party. And I say he's simple because he never really does anything that's too overdramatic or super cinematic. He knows his way around a sword and has the very, very basics of magic down. So let's get into it. Laios Touden is a tall man. This world's sit-in for humans, so that's an easy pick, go with variant human, and take the tough feat, since Laios can take a hit pretty well. That might just be his full plate armor, but either way. Laios' backstory is also pretty vague. We don't know a whole lot about him before the dungeon, but we do know that he lived with his family, and he doesn't really have the best relationship with his parents. He is very close with his sister though. So I was tempted to go with like soldier for his background, but I just made a custom one called Monster Enthusiast, and we'll get to that in a minute. And by a minute I mean right now, since I used this background to get Laios the animal handling and performance skills. Since he seems actually pretty knowledgeable about how the monsters interact with the world and how to interact with them. Now his animal handling is pretty much exclusively aimed at monsters, he does still know how to deal with them really well. Especially during the fight with the cockatrice where he was able to intimidate and stun it just by screaming. Now I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I gave Laios the performance skill just for the siren thing. Because it still takes some skill to learn and memorize all of that, even if it is so off-key that he literally drives the sirens away. Now before we get to Laios' class, I did want to look at his stats real quick because of course we're going to look at his stats, see what he's got going on. But just like Laios, it's pretty simple. He's going to prioritize strength and con since he is a frontline fighter, and since he's on the front line, he's going to be taking the brunt of the damage. But he's also really perceptive and observant when it comes to monsters, being able to tell the difference between the footsteps of a skeleton warrior and an adventuring party. He's also not exactly what I'd call clumsy, so I think a middling wisdom and dex fits perfectly fine here. Intelligence is average, sitting at 10, but charisma is where Laios kind of drops the ball. He's not an unlikable guy by any means, he just tends to say weird things at weird times. Can't read the room, and also doesn't tend to pick up on social cues. I also went ahead and put both of his +1s into strength and wisdom. When it comes to Laios' class though, that was a little bit harder for me, because while I really wanted to go with Ranger for the whole monster stuff, him knowing a lot about them, really loving monsters and studying them, the abilities just don't fit, and if I went with Ranger, then Laios would have magic before Marcille taught it to him, so I just decided to go with Fighter instead, because it fit so much better. And like I said, Laios doesn't really do anything over the top, So I was tempted to go with the champion at first to be super basic for his subclass, but I did decide to go with Battlemaster for a few reasons. The first of which is it lets him analyze and kind of get an idea of what he's fighting when it comes to monsters, how strong they are, how much stronger they are than him, and stuff like that. But also we see him doing sword maneuvers like disarming the living armor when he was fighting that, and distracting and even intimidating the cockatrice in the middle of that fight. And this next question is kind of something I had asked myself about the entire party and not just character by character, since I wanted them to all be around the same power level just with a different skill set. And that question is very simply, what level are they? So I did my best to look through their feats in the anime and pick the one that I thought was the most impressive or high level ability when it comes to D&D terms, and I used that feature to decide their final level. And for Laios, I think that's this moment right here. This is a terrifying prospect. He's stuck far above the ground in a dragon's mouth. And what does Laios do here? He sticks his leg between its teeth and uses that as a leverage point so he can hang down and stab it in the weak point to finally kill the dragon. And you can see the fear on his face as he's fighting with himself on this decision. He hesitates and then shoves his foot right in there. And sure, this might sound weird as like his biggest feat, but that's not something you just do. He was willing to sacrifice his leg for this. And that's why I think right here, he was using Indomitable, letting him reroll the wisdom save he no doubt failed the first time. Which means Laios is at least a level 9 Battlemaster fighter. Now I did go ahead and bump Laios up by 1 level to give him a few more maneuvers and better superiority die for those maneuvers, but that means at maximum, Laios is only level 10. And if his party is taking down dragons like this on the regular, that's pretty impressive, especially considering they aren't just dragging him along as dead weight. And being level 10, this does give Laios 3 ASIs. One of those is going to his strength, the other con, and the last one is going to go into Magic Initiate, since Marcille does start to teach Laios how to do some basic magic. Specifically healing magic, since she doesn't want to be the only one able to heal the party. And with Magic Initiate, Laios gets 2 cantrips, which I'm going to go with Spare the Dying and Thaumaturgy. Spare the Dying for its pseudo-healing, and Thaumaturgy because I needed a second cantrip, and Laios doesn't have any attacking magic. And his one spell being Cure Wounds, because that's the only thing Marcille really started to teach him before other stuff happened. He did try to cast a spell to unpetrify Marcille when she got bitten by a basilisk, but that didn't really work. So that leaves Laios, our monster-loving fighter, with around 110 hit points. And I'm gonna call this half-plate armor, so that leaves him with a 16 AC. He's got a solid +8 to hit for 2 attacks a turn, a +8 to strength saves, and a +7 for con saves. I could see giving him like 1 level in Ranger for the canny ability to make him a bit better at certain skills like Perception, but at the same time you could also take the ASI that I put in Strength and put that in Wisdom, so it's fine. Unfortunately, we cannot stay on Laios forever. We have been talking about him for about 7 minutes now, and I have 4 more characters to make. So we are going to do a full 180 and go to his teacher in Magic, Marcille. Marcille is the party's kind of utility caster. Yes, she has big spells like explosions and apparently gentle explosions, but she also has support spells like basic healing, water walking, water breathing, and she even has a spell that stops corpses from turning into zombies. And she learned this magic from 2 places, one of which was her mother, who is apparently some high wizard, and she also attended what I can only assume was a fairly prestigious magic school. She's also an elf, so she kinda has magic in her blood if you're going by D&D logic. And being an elf, Marcille is actually the oldest member in the party, being around 50 years old, which in D&D terms is not very old at all. Elves can live up to like 1,000 years old, and they're not even considered adults until they hit 100. And you know what? I can kinda see that with Marcille. She has this really weird switch between being super mature and having a tantrum like a child. Her background is also pretty straightforward. I went with the Sage background, but you could also easily pivot and use one of the Strixhaven student backgrounds if you wanted to. This background gives her the History and Arcana skills, which she kinda needs for being a wizard. Right, by the way, Marcille is a wizard. Duh. Marcille is like the textbook wizard. She uses a spellbook to copy down all her magic stuff into, she went to a magical school or college of some sort, and she is super book smart. So with the mystery of her class solved, here are her stats. Those being high intelligence and wisdom, middling con and dex, average charisma, and then she dumps strength because Marcille is kind of a princess. She doesn't really ever do any heavy lifting. I know I kind of shoved the stats right in the middle of the class area, but that is because I have a very loose script and kind of lost my place. But that is fine, because right now we are going to move on and do the subclass stuff, which for Marcille was actually kind of hard, but also not as important. Since Marcille is what's known as a hybrid caster in lore, meaning she can use two different styles of magic, which initially made me want to multiclass her, but if I did that, then I would have to make her like level 20 if I wanted the right spells, and that wasn't something I was ready to do, since the goal is to kind of have the whole party around the same power level. So instead, I just went with the evocation school, since one of her specialties is explosion magic. No, not that kind of explosion magic, but mostly stuff like fireball, firebolt, mostly just fire spells. Now I said one of her specialties because Marcille actually does have something she is better at than explosion magic. Something known as ancient magic or black magic depending on who you ask. And her ancient magic is where we kinda get her biggest feat so far in the show, bringing someone back from the dead. Let me explain. Fallon, Laios' sister, died in the first episode, eaten by a dragon. And the entire point up until when Marcille does this is getting down to the dragon, killing it, and reviving Fallon. And from everything I can find, it looks like it took the party 8 days to do this. And if Marcille is going to revive someone after that long of a period of time, she would need to at least be casting Raise Dead. Now you could argue that Marcille casted an even higher level resurrection spell because it also replaced all of her missing organs and meat on her body, but that's more of a product of how resurrection works in Dungeon Meshi, where they have to use calories and flesh from other things to restore a person if they are too badly injured, so we don't really need to worry about that. And the Raise Dead spell is a 5th level spell, meaning Marcille would need to be at least level 9. We also know she mentioned having a spell to help with petrification, which, that's Greater Restoration. You'd also need to have a 5th level spell slot for that one. So somehow this and this are on the same level. But there's one other thing that I kinda need to point out, and that is that neither Raise Dead or Greater Restoration are available to wizards normally. But if you watch the first ever video I did like this back on the main channel with Freerun, you'll know that if there's a one-off spell or just a few special spells that aren't available to the list, I'm just going to hand wave it because I'm not going to go diving into a different class for that when it doesn't fit. People having unique spells is nothing new. And obviously being a wizard, Marcille has a bunch of spells that we might not have seen her cast, but the ones we have seen her use and ones that I feel like fit really well, I will have listed right here. And after 10 levels of wizardry, Marcille ends up with between 35 and 45 hit points, which either means I'm very wrong on my dice rolls here, or the Undine did a lot less damage than you think. But either way, that is around 45 HP, 14 AC assuming she doesn't have some special magical item, and a bunch of spells, which is obviously where her utility comes from. She also gets 2 ASIs, and for those I went with Magic Initiate Druid and Ritual Caster. Druid both for Cure Wounds, and funnily enough, I decided to go with Shillelagh because she does have a tendency to smack things with her staff, and having Shillelagh means that those bonks are going to do more than just, well, bonk them. This is shaping up to be a bit of a longer video though, so let's move on to the next character, the actual simplest character in the party, Chilchuck. Now before I mentioned how Laios' backstory was kind of vague and we don't know a whole lot about him, but Chilchuck's backstory blows that out of the water in terms of how little we know. Let's go down the list here and see just how much we know about Chilchuck. He has 3 kids, his wife left him, and he hates mimics. That's it. He does apparently have some side business where he helps make contracts for adventurers, but there's not a whole lot of info on that. Now when it comes to Chilchuck's in-game statistics, the best thing I could find to match his half-foot race would be a halfling, which seems pretty on point. He's lucky, brave, nimble, and naturally stealthy, which is perfect for the party's lockpick. And to go along with that, he has high dex, high wisdom, decent intelligence and con, average charisma, and again, someone who dumps strength. And I mean, like, are you surprised? Chilchuck looks like you could snap him like a Slim Jim. And from everything I've told you so far, I'm pretty sure you can guess that Chilchuck is going to be a rogue. But he is going to be slightly lower level than the rest of the party, because Chilchuck goes out of his way to not engage in combat as much as he can. He is not a fighter. He is there to disarm traps, open doors, and guide the party. But Chilchuck does still do his best to help in a fight, even if he isn't directly dealing damage. And I took that as him using the help action, but at a safe range. And the only rogue subclass that can do that is the Mastermind Rogue, which not only lets him cast the help action, yes, help is a spell now, which not only lets him do the help action as a bonus action, leaving his main action open, it also lets him do it at a range of 30 feet. Meaning Chilchuck can sit on the sidelines and still help with the fight by giving advice or making stray bow shots that might not necessarily deal damage, but still either put the target off balance or open up a weak point. And since Chilchuck is pretty averse to fighting, finding his best feat was kinda hard. But I think this right here best shows what Chilchuck can do. His main thing is disarming traps and opening chests. So this room, chock full of traps, that Chilchuck not only avoids completely, he doesn't take any damage from them. And I think that is a textbook example of the evasion ability, because plenty of these would be dexterity saving throws. Spikes, fire, falling axes, all dexterity saving throws to dodge stuff. And on the offhand that one of the traps is something other than a dex save, I feel like one of his ASIs should go into the Dungeon Delver feat, because it's kind of his thing. On top of that, dying to mimics and traps is something Chilchuck is very experienced with from his early days being an adventurer, so I'm pretty sure he should know his way around those by now. So like with Marcille and Laios, I took their highest level feat, which in this case is evasion, and I bumped him up by 1 level, so that puts Chilchuck at level 8, meaning he gets 1 more ASI, and I'm putting that right into wisdom. So Chilchuck is going to have an amazing perception skill considering I put his expertise there, so he is going to spot all the treasure and hopefully find all the traps. So this is Chilchuck at his current point in the story as far as I can tell. I haven't read the manga really, I'm just going off the anime here. So he's going to have around 50 HP if you give him good dice rolls, but more than likely around 45. And I'm going to say his armor is studded leather, so he can get a 15 AC on top of that. And even then he has things like evasion and uncanny dodge to make sure he doesn't take too much damage, especially if one of Marcel's fireballs goes ballistic. Okay, only 2 left, and we are moving on to one of the favorite characters of the show, Senshi. And while this build is a little weird, I'm really proud of what I got for Senshi here. Now, I am not going to go into detail on Senshi's backstory because there is an entire episode dedicated to that and the trauma he goes through, and it's really good, so go watch it. I'm just going to say his background is the haunted one, and leave it at that. Okay, back on track. Senshi is very clearly a dwarf, but more specifically a hill dwarf. Mostly because I want the dwarven toughness for an extra 1 HP at every level. It's really good. He also has resistance to poison stuff, can work with stone tools, gets his free tool proficiency, can use axes, hand axes, light hammers, war hammers, all the dwarf stuff. His stats are also super normal, almost identical to Laios' actually, just swapping around a few of the numbers. High strength and con, decent wisdom and charisma, average intelligence, and he dumps dexterity since Senshi is the clumsiest one in the group, and he also sinks like a brick. Now that is all very normal stuff, but the part that I was really proud of was what I decided to go for his class. And I took this from one specific moment in the show. Sure, you could say he's a fighter because he's using an axe and fighting stuff. You could also say he's a barbarian because he's using an axe, and that one moment fighting the dragon where he gets really pissed off and rips the sword off the ground. But that's not what I want to focus on. I want to look at this, when they're on the 3rd floor, I think it's 3rd floor, and Marcille is trying to cast a spell on Senshi to let him walk across the water, and he throws a tantrum over it because he hates magic so much. And not only does he hate magic, magic is less effective on Senshi, all because his hair is super dirty. Something to do with hair being a really important part of magic, so upkeeping it is really important. And Senshi does not brush or wash his hair ever, he just lives in a cave. And I took this opportunity to make his primary class a paladin. Now that does contradict with what I said a moment ago about Senshi hating spells, but just because you have spells doesn't mean you have to use them. What I'm mostly focused on here is the subclass Oath of the Ancients, and their ability to take half damage from spells. It's really not the best way to choose a class, but hey, if I could use my Paladin Oath of Restriction from my other channel, I would, but these are strictly non-homebrew. Now you might be thinking that this ability, Aura of Warding, is only a level 7 feature, meaning Senshi is around the same level as Chilchuck. But Senshi has been living in this dungeon for a long time, since before it was open to the public. So I did decide to make Senshi a little bit higher level than the rest of the party. And I did that by giving him 4 levels of Barbarian, because while it is a small point, getting stepped on by a dragon and just having a few broken ribs at the end and not being a pancake is impressive. So I did give him a few levels, specifically going with the Bear Totem Barbarian, because Senshi is easily the tankiest boy in the entire party. And as far as I can tell, he's really the only one to ever get a power boost by being angry, which is specifically a barbarian thing, so yeah. And being a total level of 12 does mean Senshi is tied with Laios for the most amount of ASIs and or feats. 1 going into strength, 1 going into con, and again 1 going into the tough feat, making him even tankier. So Senshi, by the time he joins the party, or at least by the time that they fight the red dragon, is going to have around 110 hit points. And because of Senshi's abysmal dexterity score, he's not really going to be using his unarmored defense. So instead, I'm going to say he has the equivalent of a breastplate between his helmet and the other bits of armor over his body, giving Senshi an AC of 14 plus, or I guess minus his dexterity in this case. But he does also have that adamantite pot lid, which does count as a shield because, well, he uses it as one, and it used to be a shield. So the plus 2 from that shield, or possibly even a plus 3 if you consider it being a magical shield, so that does bump his AC up to either 15 or 16 depending on which one you go with. Like I said, Senshi is very easily the tankiest person in the party, and also the most skilled. He might not be the best fighter, and certainly can't cast any magic, but he is passable in pretty much everything else, and can seriously take a hit and still keep going. Also for a dwarf, he's got some hops. Oh, I can feel my voice dying. Okay, we have one more character, and while I was trying to finish this build, I went to go look through my notes for Izutsumi, and the only thing I had was the word cat, so we're off to a great start. Jokes aside, her backstory is kinda dark. She was cursed and had her soul mixed with a monster soul, so she ended up as this weird mix between a human and a cat. It affects her personality, her biology, and a bunch of other stuff, but we'll get into that in a second. Since we probably have the least amount of backstory on her aside from just knowing that she's cursed, because she joined the party pretty late in the season. So again, I had to go with a custom background called the Cursed, but again, that's not really something you have to worry about. Backgrounds are not super important in this version of 5e, but they will be changing and being much more important here soon. As for her race, there are a few different options. Well, mostly 2. You could go Shifter, but she doesn't really transform at all, unless you count the Changeling Ring, but no. The other options are a Simic Hybrid, which would be interesting and is kind of an experiment on people to merge them with animals, but none of them are really feline enough for me. And that leaves us with the Tabaxi, who not only get a claw natural weapon, which is something Izutsumi uses, but they are also very fast. Also, I just realized I could have possibly gone with the Outlander background since she doesn't really have table manners or knows social cue, whatever, you get the point. She's a cat person, both in personality and body. So for her stats, I went with really high dexterity in Wisdom for nimbleness and perception, decent strength and con, okay charisma, and dump intelligence since I am not confident that Izutsumi can read. Izutsumi also has a bunch of skills because her background gives her 2 skills. Being a Tabaxi also gives her perception and stealth, and then she gets to pick 4 more skills from her first class, the Rogue. She ends up with 8 different skills: acrobatics, athletics, intimidation, investigation, perception, stealth, survival, and sleight of hand. Now for Izutsumi's class and level, it was really hard for me to pick out a defining moment as her biggest feat, because we only really see 1 1/4 fights with her technically. So for her, I mostly just made her the same level as the rest of the party, and then did my best to see which levels for which class fit her best. And that starts off with 4 levels of Assassin Rogue, since after some stuff happened and she got separated from her party, she ended up sneak attacking the main group and threatening them for food. That gives her expertise in stealth and perception, along with the Assassinate feature, And for her ASI at level 4, I decided to give her the Slasher feat, since she does primarily slashing damage using her claws as weapons. Now I did mention classes a minute ago, because obviously Izutsumi is not going to be a level 4 rogue in a party of level 10s. She is also going to multiclass into Monk. And it was kind of hard to decide on what subclass to go with, since a few of them had some things that fit, and Shadow Monk seemed really fitting at first until I realized that she doesn't cast any sort of spells. And the first feature for Shadow Monk is to cast like darkness and silence and stuff, so I had to throw that out. But after a bit of back and forth and asking my testers for some opinions, we went with the Way of the Drunken Master. Now obviously Izutsumi is not a drunk, at least as far as I'm aware, but the way she fights does kind of work really well with how this is not flavored necessarily, but how it works mechanically, making her even faster and letting her disengage as part of her flurry of blows, so she can run in and run out doing hit and run tactics like a cat. Do cats do that? I don't know, it's been so long since I've had a cat. And my last cat was definitely not a rogue, he was a barbarian little monster. Anyway, back on track, it also lets her stand up from prone, only spending 5 feet of movement, and she can deflect attacks so that if an attack misses her, she can force it to hit another creature next to her. And since she's using her claws and being a monk makes them dexterity, she can get sneak attack with her claws. This ends up being a total of 6 levels in monk, and combined with the 4 levels of rogue, that puts her just in line with the rest of the party, aside from Senshi, being level 10. I did put her other ASI from monk into dexterity, so she has a total of 18 dexterity, but here are the rest of her stats, skills, saving throws, all that good stuff right here. And that's it. I don't have any more characters to make. I'm not making Fallon yet. Fallon is currently still not herself as far as I'm aware, so I won't be doing that. And while I could make the ex-party members, this video is almost 30 minutes long, and it is most certainly going to delay next week's video. So I'm gonna go and take a sleep because it is currently 7 in the morning and I have to get up and edit tomorrow. Okay, outro time. So first off, I'd like to thank my testers because, as always, they helped me go through these builds and make sure everything was in line and working, so thank you. And of course, thank you to my patrons, who without you guys, I would have a much harder time continuing making this channel, or the other channel, both channels. And if you are on my Patreon, not only can you get all of these builds, all 5 of them right here, for just $1 single, you can also get your name right here in the ending credits. I have been thinking of maybe moving the Patreon thing to the beginning of the video, so you guys can see that if you don't watch to the end of the video, but I'm not sure yet. I'll have to test that. But that is going to do it for today. I will see you all next week, and as always, have a wonderful day.